So when we last left off, we had discussed two of the really big names of 20th century abstraction, and that would be Matisse and Picasso. We also talked about Braque and the relationship between Picasso and Braque. They were close friends for a while, and pretty much worked together simultaneously, sharing studios, visiting different parts of France together. But there was another trend that was going on, which was a much more distilled, much more pure attempt at abstraction, a much more intellectual attempt at abstraction. And strangely enough, it really begins with Kandinsky. Kandinsky here seems much more an expressionist, and much more a part of like that. And in fact, he was for a while connected with the Blue Rider group, which was a German group of painters who were expressionists. And that feels very much kind of like the same mode as like Die Brucker and some of the other uh, expressionist movements. But Kandinsky work, especially after he left Germany, went back to wrong direction, went back to Russia shortly after the revolution, I think. His work becomes tighter and more simplified and much more about design. He's much more influenced by ideas about design, um, and there were lots of ideas about connecting painting with design that were percolating in the 20th century, and so this leads to other Russian artists who develop this idea, what they call suprematism, the idea of making art that is so essentially about the most pure things that a painting can be about, just about a couple of shapes, and two decisions of color, and two decisions about shape and scale, and that's all there is in this painting. Or probably the most supreme of the suprematist statements, his white on white, otherwise known as white square on white. Um, I included here the self-portrait of Malevich, so you could see how Malevich's ideas of painting did shift over time, and he didn't stick to painting only this for his entire life. And that was percolating, and there were a lot of people. There was, like I said, there was the Bauhaus movement, and there were artists who were creating paintings that were somewhat similar to that in the Bauhaus movement, and there was also the De Stijl movement, and probably the most famous artist of the De Stijl was Piet Mondrian. And I include these two early paintings so you can see a little bit about how we get to the later Mondrian paintings. That these paintings of trees are really the beginning of his grids. And here are some later compositions. And the chronological order is it's not really, there isn't that much of a chronological order. I have the Boogie Woogie here mostly just because it fit on the page well. But it is actually one of his last paintings, actually. But the compositions, red, yellow, and blue, the variations of those, are some of his most famous ones. Here are two more. This one here, on the right-hand side, is one of my favorites. I just love the, how everything is getting pushed to the side and how much open white space there is. It feels like probably, once again, a very supreme 20th century type statement. And then lastly, I want to talk about two more artists. I think I might have time to do it. I said that I would end the lecture talking also about another expressionist, and there are so many that we could talk about, but I decided to really just concentrate on Oskar Kokoschka, who is a particular favorite of mine. And he is such a gorgeous painter, and just I love the way he puts his paint down, the brush strokes. Also, it's just such a fun, kind of humorous painter. I love his work almost as much as I love Max Beckmann, and I probably should have included Beckmann as well. And I love this self-portrait right there with his large-sized head and his big hands. One of the things also that I really like about Kokoschka is he always signs his paintings OK, and that just really feels very comforting to me. See right there. Okay. And I also wanted to talk about Paul Klee. I mentioned the Bauhaus earlier, And Paul Klee was one of the painters who taught at the Bauhaus, although he was probably the most idiosyncratic of artists who worked at the Bauhaus. The least very kind of like his paintings are they make sense in a but not in a kind of a universal design sense way, but more in a personal idiosyncratic way. Um, and his decisions very much are dependent on texture and visual texture. And but anyway, they're just gorgeous paintings. And lastly, talking about this part of the 20th century, you have to end on Marcel Duchamp. And he's in a way like a completely different thing. You can make the case that Duchamp is like the ultimate modernist, the ultimate statement of high modernism. But another way to see him is almost like he's the very first postmodernist. We probably won't have time to talk about postmodernism as its own movement, but Duchamp in a piece like this, where he found a store urinal and submitted it to an art show, signed it with a fictitious name, but an actual date, and and made a work of art out of how how other people react to this act of provocation. In fact, he kept all the letters, all the letters he sent where he applied, and all the letters where he sent to people complaining about things being cut, this piece being cut from shows, all the letters being told that he's a fraud and a terrible guy, and all the horrible reviews or all the good reviews. He kept it all, um, documenting this one work of art and its effort to redefine our boundaries as to what is or isn't art. So I think that's where we're going to end. All right.